Alright, so welcome to the video. Today we're going to be talking about a really simple thing to do in Digital Performer, and it has to do with the metronome or click that's featured in the program. This particular feature is pretty common within any other DAW. You might be familiar with a metronome, click track. These are things that you can use. These are just interchangeable terms, if you will. But essentially, if you're not sure what a click is or a metronome, it is some sort of timekeeper, for lack of a better way to say it. It allows you to play some sort of audible noise, whether it be through some sort of audio clip, an audio click, whether it be like a MIDI click that's maybe triggered by like a synth or something like that, or others. It could be even a visual click, and it's something that helps you keep time so you know where you are in the project and when to come in and all that good stuff. It's just a timekeeper. So the content of this video today is not so much to talk about like what click does, but how to utilize it in Digital Performer, so that you can stay in time for whatever it is that you're trying to do. And what we're going to focus on are a couple different things. One is just how to like activate it and some of the settings that you can change within preferences to better choose and format the click as you want it to be and sound like, depending on your workflow. But also how to create a click track in Digital Performer outside of just enabling click within the program. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. For folks that are coming maybe from like Pro Tools, that are used to having like a dedicated click track, this is kind of like a shout out to you. But even if you're not coming from Pro Tools and you want like a dedicated soundbite, or even just a track in your project that allows you to kind of have some more intricate control over a click signal, so you can control what it sounds like, and maybe to yourself, but even maybe to other people if you're sending that out to other folks. This video is for you, and we'll show you how to do that. So let's open a project here. Just a simple. We really don't need a lot of material in the project to really go over this, because we're just focusing on the click. So let's dive in. I'm going to turn off this background music here for just a moment. Cool. So the first thing that we need to do, let's just go ahead and kind of blow up this window a little bit so we can see it a little bit easier. But in order to turn on the click or metronome in Digital Performer, and bear with me, I'm just going to interchangeably use those terms. We can do so from the control panel up here. There's a kind of a quick control section, if you will. If we right click this, we have some options here. We call them auxiliary controls in Digital Performer. But in that auxiliary controls section, we have a couple of different items. One of those being the click or the metronome, and it looks like a metronome symbol. If we were to just kind of pull open, what the heck a metronome is. If I can spell it, metronome. You'll see it kind of looks like a bunch of different things. There's digital metronomes, there's analog metronomes, but classically this is what a metronome is, so analog metronome, and that's what we've kind of used for the symbol here, to make it a little bit more fashionable and kind of a callback to the original idea of what a metronome is. But anyways, that's what that looks like if you didn't know. In order to enable it, we just click on it. So right now it's disabled, it's not blue, kind of like audible mode is, kind of like auto scroll mode is. And depending on your theme in Digital Performer, the color could change too, so keep that in mind. It may not always be blue, but nevertheless, this is the button that you would want to press. Right? So we can just toggle it on and off. If we double click it, as you can see, it actually opens the respective click settings, which are important. Bear with me here. Let me just open my sound settings so you can hear what this sounds like. But let me just double click on that and we'll get that out of the way. But that's how you kind of quick toggle it. That's it. Now we can use other options to access that too. We could use like run command if we wanted to. We could go up to the studio menu and turn on click to toggle it. Obviously there's a key command. I'm on Windows, so it's Control 5. For Mac, it could be Command 5. There also are some numpad, I think, options, if I'm not mistaken, that maybe you can control. I could be mistaken in saying that, but with Digital Performer, you can pretty much assign whatever command you want to whatever key. So the world is your oyster here when it comes to assigning key commands. But anyways, those are some ways that you can activate or deactivate the click. So pretty simple and straightforward. Now when it's active and we play the sequence, we're going to hear that click kind of happening in the background, right? It's just very standard 4/4. There's no really accents, at least the way that I have it programmed or anything of that sort. If there are, it's very soft. So, depending on like the way that maybe your digital performer is already configured, or if it's kind of at defaults, you may hear that this sounds the same to you. It may sound different. But this is kind of the default de facto sound of digital performer's click. Now we can change that if we want, and that's where we kind of go back to the click preferences. To get there, we can again double click on the click preferences just by opening it. That's I'd say the easiest way to do it. But you could equally just go to digital performers preferences in general. On Windows, I have to go to the edit menu. On Mac, you could just hit Command comma. But this gets there, and I'm going to turn off audition click now so it doesn't annoy you in the video. But that's a good kind of transition point here. Once we're in this preference window, you have the option of auditioning the click within this window, so you can not only hear what it sounds like just in general, but when you do make changes in this window, you'll be able to hear that by auditioning it, so you know exactly what it's going to sound like when you actually use the real thing. So in this particular window, we have a couple of different options available to us. One of the main ones I'm going to focus on today are going to be the audio click, because I'd say that's the most standard type of click that you might find yourself using. But for folks out there that maybe have like a special sound that they want to use on a synthesizer, or if you're more into like film scoring and using video within Digital Performer, we do have the option for visual punches, which kind of goes back to the idea of using like a visual click where the screen will flash in certain ways. So that you know exactly where to come in. If you're looking at a picture when you're scoring, there's maybe the time code, and you want to maybe you've imprinted like markers and whatnot into Digital Performer using that kind of mechanism here, so that you can, or in the program, so that you can, so that you know when a certain section's coming up or a film cue is coming up, etc. So I'm not really going to go over that too much. Simply because I don't have a project that's really set up to do that. But I do encourage you to experiment with that, especially if you're more film score focused. Maybe that's another video we could go over at some point. But for today's video, it's more going to be focused on audio with a little bit of MIDI. Even though I don't have a MIDI option really set up, but we'll talk about it. So moving in, it's kind of split up into different sections. We have kind of our section here, which is kind of like a type of click, which allows us to choose audio, MIDI, visual punches. And then down here we have some of those extraneous visual punches sub options for like accident, normal, punches output, like where those punches would be output to. Like, would it be on the movie? Would it be, some sort of like external machine or something like that? We also have the option to like toggle those on and off. So you don't have to have a click if you don't want to. But obviously, if you're going to be recording to a click, if you find that might be beneficial to you, you want to make sure it's on. Over here, we have our MIDI click section, which controls the parameters of what the MIDI click is going to be doing, like, what our accented channel is going to be, what our normal channel is going to be, what the note is, velocity, gate, etc. Below that, we have our audio click section, which controls the audio click channels. We have a drop down, as you can see here, that is associated with a bundle, an output bundle in Digital Performer. This is basically where that audio click is going to play out of, what output bundle. Then we have our accented and normal drop downs, which allow us to choose what specific type of sound that we want to use for the click, for accented or normal. Over here we have a volume setting for those respective accented and normal clicks. And then finally we have like a master click volume, which, as you can see here, sets the level of the master click volume. So it's just going to determine how loud it's going to be in general outside of the individual accented or normal click volume levels. Finally, down here, we have some other options here. We have options for always click. So it says always click, make the click audible when Digital Performer is counting off, playing, or recording. And we have some sub options if you want to have a little bit more control over that, depending on what you're doing. Like if you just want to hear the click when you're doing a count off, like a 2-bar count off, if that's active, which is here. And then after that recording process, or after that count off process, stops, then you won't hear it anymore. We have only when recording, which is pretty straightforward. It only happens to recording. You have some sub options for no accent if you want to disable that. And of course, Audition Click, which we talked about already. We finally have this waveform editor beat click. It says this is the audio file for beats played as clicks in the waveform editor, which has to deal with the waveform editor, which we're not going to really talk about too much, but just know it's there. So what I'd like to do first is just talk briefly about the MIDI click, because I don't really have anything set up for it, but it's good to know about. If this was enabled just like such, the MIDI click is going to be only used in Digital Performer 4, like when the metronome or click option is on. And what's cool about this is, again, kind of going back to it, we have this like accented and normal drop down, which determine, where that accented or normal sound is going to, what it's going to be if we have like external MIDI gear connected to it, like, like a Roland JV 1080 or, some sort of other sound module like a EMU system or, whatever motif, Yamaha motif or something. But when we click on one of these drop downs, we have a list of our MIDI channels and output devices, really, and their corresponding channels that we can choose from. So depending on your setup, if you have, some sort of module that's hooked up to your computer via a MIDI interface, or maybe it's hooked up to your audio interface, as long as you're able to go in and choose that path. So, I have a Motu M4 connected to my computer right now. Let's imagine that I had a JV 1080 connected to my M4 device on the MIDI input and output connections that the M4 features in the back. That would allow me to send MIDI information in general to that Roland to trigger some sort of sounds, and then I could, maybe bring that back in, say, via corresponding line inputs on the M4, or maybe I have that Roland connected to a mixer of some sort that has speakers connected to it so I can hear the output of that Roland. Well, if I go in here using that example and I decide to send MIDI information, specifically the MIDI click on the accented and normal drop downs here to the M series output, specifically on maybe a certain channel, maybe my accented is corresponding to a certain sound on channel 1 of a Roland patch, and then maybe my normal, and maybe this is backwards for some folks, but let's change this up. So maybe my normal is set to channel 1 of my M4. Maybe my accent is set to channel 2. And then I've programmed my JV 1080 to have 2 different patches. One patch being on channel 1, one patch being on MIDI channel 2. So that way, whenever the click track was firing off and from Digital Performer, when it was active, it would send this, in this case, a C3 note at a velocity of 127 to MIDI channel 2 in this case, which would trigger that accented patch that I've kind of assigned and generated or just randomly chosen within the JV 1080 at that respective pitch and at that respective velocity. And then whenever a normal click beat, if you will, was detected and fired off when the click track click option was enabled, it would send a C3 pitch at a velocity of 64 to that kind of first patch that I selected. So that's what it means. It's just basically you're sending click information, like MIDI data, over some specified MIDI output, an external device, to put it lightly. And you're more specifically sending some sort of like note and velocity information to that module, so it triggers a certain sound so that you can hear it. So it's just using like an external MIDI device or sound module to generate the click noise that you want to hear, as opposed to using something like Audio Click that's kind of just sound files that are built into Digital Performer that you're accessing. So hopefully that makes sense. It might not really apply to anybody, but if you have like a very specific click sound that you really like or want to use on an external module that you have in your studio, this is the perfect option to use. All right, so I'll digress there. Let's talk about Audio Click, because again, this is kind of a more standard way of going about it, which you're going to find in other DAWs. So again, kind of going over it, we have our outputs, we have our accented and normal, we have our master volume and individual accented and normal volumes levels for these clicks. But what do these like do? What do these mean? So again, this dropdown determines where that audio click is going to go to so that we can hear it. By default, for me, it's set to main out left and right, which, let me hit done here. That's a output bundle in Digital Performer. Now, I'm not going to go over bundles in Digital Performer in this video too much. That could be another video. But if we go to bundles, which I was able to access by hitting Shift U as in uniform, I click on outputs, and as you can see, my outputs for my M4, which are outputs 1 and 2, their output name is main out left and right. So that's where that click setting, specifically for audio click, is set to. It's set to main out left and right. That way, when click is enabled and it's active, and if I'm auditioning it or it's playing in my sequence, I can hear it through my headphones. If I had speakers connected, I could hear it through my M4 outputs 1 and 2. I could go in here and I could change the output too if I wanted to. Maybe you have like a special output on your audio interface that you want to hear it through, or a specific line output pair. Maybe you have a headphone amp connected to that and you want to keep it separate so that only you hear it versus other folks, right? You could go into this window and you could choose a new output. So I could, choose output 3 and 4 maybe instead on my interface. Maybe you have more outputs than I do and you could choose that. We also have bus assignments, which is pretty cool. And we're going to talk about that more in a second. But just know that you have internal bus options in Digital Performer that you can select too, which is going to come in handy later on. So again, just to recap, this is just the output location of where that click, that audible audio click, accident and normal is going to go to. For accident and normal, this is pretty straightforward. Right now it's set to MPC click, which is the sound that you're hearing right now. This is the audio file that is basically being used as the audio click source. Now, if I click on these drop downs, I have quite a few options to choose from. These again are just audio samples that are built into the program that you can use to change what the click sounds like. So let's imagine for a second I wanted to keep the normal click on MPC, but maybe I wanted to change the accented to the Yuri click, just like this. So let's see what it sounds like. So it's a little bit different. Maybe I can exaggerate the Yuri click. So there's a bit of a difference there. If I really turn down the normal, so a slight difference there, but let's exaggerate it even more because these clicks are pretty similar sounding. Let's use like a cowbell for the accent, right? Cool. So as you can see, you can kind of mix and match the sounds there. Obviously when it comes to the different sounds that you want to pick in this given list, that's totally up to you, but you have some flexibility over that. On top of that, the last thing I'll mention about this, because again, it's a pretty straightforward option in here, you do have the choice of choosing your own file. So if you have like a custom click noise that you've made in an audio file format, you can actually go into choose file within one of these drop downs here, and you can select that file, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of customization there. A lot of these sounds are great for maybe your needs, but if you're coming from like a different DAW and you really like that click noise, you could record it and then just use that as a file. You can make a click out of really anything you want. So go to town, you can make it out of silly noises if you want, or just like off the wall, whatever helps you keep in time, right? But keep that as an option in your back pocket. It's a really handy little feature there. Of course, we have our master volume here, which again sets the level of the click output. I think that's pretty straightforward. You can max it out to plus 6 dB. The standard is 0. You can turn it down all the way to negative infinity if you'd like, but this is a pretty straightforward option, and that's pretty much it when it comes to the audio click options in Digital Performer. Now, earlier in the video, we saw what happens when we just enable click, keep it enabled, and then hit play given the parameters that we have set in click options, where it says always click. I'm not going to go over these. We've kind of briefly touched on these options. I think they're pretty straightforward, but I encourage you to experiment with what they sound like given the respective feature that you or option that you sub option that you choose really. Depending, because you may not always use like count off, you may find yourself always wanting to use click, and that's really what this video is kind of geared towards right now. So I'm not going to experiment with these in this video, but feel free to do so on your end to better understand what they mean. There's also some quick descriptions here to better understand what they mean, and of course there's always the manual too if you're a little confused outside of the video content here. But kind of going back to it, you saw earlier, as we have shown, when the metronome, the click is on and we hit play, we just start hearing it, right? Pretty straightforward, right? Well, there's not a lot of control inside the Digital Performer program, like while we're in our sequence, for controlling like what that sounds like without having to go into preferences, right? In order to really dial in that noise, we kind of have to bounce around between, maybe our sequence here, maybe auditioning click in preferences, and kind of dialing in those noises that we pick, the sounds that we pick for the clicks, the respective settings in here. On top of that, we also have just like one specific output option that we can choose for the click to go out of in an audio click format. So yes, there is flexibility there, but when you're, kind of working in a project, when you have, clients that you're working with, maybe multiple musicians that are in a session, even if it's just one, you're a little constricted and constrained when it comes to what you can do for that client in the event they want to say, hear a click along with the music that's playing. You can really only kind of customize it to one person at a time in this window. But we can exploit the options in this window to make that a little bit more flexible. So how do we do that? We kind of briefly touched on this a moment ago. Well, we can change the audio output and location of the audio click to, instead of a physical output on our audio interface, to a bus. And by doing so, it gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of what we can do with this click moving forward. Right. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and change this output from our mains so that I'm not going to hear this click in my headphones anymore. You're not going to hear it through the video for the next 5 minutes or so, but we will momentarily. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to new stereo bus. It could be a mono bus if you want it to be just like a mono click. That's fine too, but I'm going to use stereo for this, and I'm going to assign it to an arbitrary bus. I'm going to just choose like bus 25 and 26. Hit done. So now when I hit play, even though metronome is enabled, we're not going to be hearing the click, because what's happening is that it's sending that signal to bus 25 and 26. But currently in this project, I really haven't done anything with any buses or anything. We actually need to do something with those buses that would be beneficial to us. And kind of going back to the example where maybe we have multiple, clients that are wanting to hear a click, we would need to somehow get that click via that bus into the outputs or headphones of those clients, wherever they're connected to on our audio interface or playback system, whatever that may be. And this is where we can get into creating and generating an official click track within Digital Performer. So we have more control over that in our project without having to access the preferences. So I'd say one of the easiest ways that you can set this up is using an Aux Track in Digital Performer. We can go up here to the project menu, go to Add Track, and choose Aux Track. And this is what an Aux Track looks like if you're not familiar. But we have a couple of options, which I'm not going to go too much into because this is kind of maybe another video of like how track basics work. But the important thing to know is that we have a drop-down for audio inputs. We have a drop-down for audio outputs, which again is really what we're going to exploit. And I'm going to show you something else later on in the mixing board that's going to become important as well. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to assign the input of the aux track so that it receives an audio input signal from somewhere. And you may have guessed it already, but we're going to choose bus 25 and 26 because we want to receive the signal that's coming through the metronome, or that's being output from the metronome when it's active, into this aux track. So just simply by doing this, and again, of course, making sure that our output here is set to the output that we want to hear something out of. If I hit play now, we now hear the metronome. So like, why is this important? We could have just like not done this, Well, again, it kind of goes back to that example of flexibility, and maybe we have other people that are in the studio that want to hear the click track, and they may be connected to different outputs on an audio interface or some sort of playback system that you have set up that differ than the outputs that you're currently listening to. So maybe you want to keep those separate, right? Well, let's go to the mixing board, and I think this might become more apparent, right? So if we go to the mixing board, one of the first things that you notice is that we have this kind of general channel fader, channel strip, I should say, laid out with options that allow us to kind of control what that track is doing and signal on that track. So one of the main examples is and this might apply more to if I had a mono click, to be honest, which maybe I should go back and do that. But for continuity purposes, if I just hit play now, one of the major options is that I have the option to pan it. So I can pan it in different sides of my headphones or outputs. And maybe that's beneficial to somebody that maybe only wants to hear, a click on a certain side of their headphone, so it's not as distracting in the mix that they're being sent from the DAW, right? So that's one advantage. Another advantage is fader control. We now have a direct fader in Digital Performer that can control the respective click level wherever it's being sent, which is pretty cool, right? So we don't have to go back into our preferences here and worry about the master volume level or how loud our accent and normal click volume is. Those are kind of dialed in already. What we need to do at this point, or what we have available to us at this point, and I should probably move over, but what we have at this point is simply a fader control for how loud that click is going to be that's being sent to my output. So that's huge. That's a major benefit, and a very easy way of going about it. We just switch to the mixing board, or maybe we have the channel strip open as a sidebar window where we can focus on that track and just quickly move that fader up and down to balance out click. Is it the most optimized method for folks that are running, maybe are connected to multiple outputs on your audio interface? Not quite, and we can make that even more efficient though, now that we have an Aux Track. But this is a pretty efficient way starting off to be able to get yourself a fader control over the click track itself without having to access preferences. It gives you pan control, and then we have everything else that pretty much exists on a channel strip that an Aux Track allows you for, or allows you to utilize, I should say, so that we can make our click setup even more efficient than it already is. We have mute. We could record automation if we wanted to. Maybe there's like a level where a certain section where the click needs to be softer for some reason versus louder. We could automate that. We have effect control if we really needed to use that. Like maybe we needed to put a reverb on a click for some reason. We could do that. But the most important thing I'd say, besides pan control, mute control, and fader control, is that we have send control. And this is where we're really going to start to make this setup more efficient. If you're not familiar with sends, maybe you are already. Sends allow us to basically split a signal off of a track and send it somewhere else outside of where it's already being sent to. So for example, if I have a click signal coming into this track, let me make sure my metronome's on. We know that right now it's being sent to my main outs because that's what I've chosen as the output of this track. So that's output kind of number one, if we want to call it, that it's going to. That's great. But that's one singular output. What if I needed to send it to other outputs? Going back to the example of maybe I have clients that are connected to my audio interface or some sort of headphone distribution system or, mixing setup, whatever it may be, that are connected to other outputs on my gear that differ from my mains. Well, that's where sends can come to play, because then I can split that metronome signal and keep it being sent out of the main so I can hear it, but I can send it to other outputs on my gear at will. Now, my audio interface only has 4 outputs in total, so this may not be the best example, but if you have an interface or a mixer, something that's you're using in digital performer that has more than 4 outputs, this is going to become pretty intense in like what you can choose and what you can utilize. There's a lot of flexibility there, whereas mine is like a pretty limited interface for like a setup like this, but I can still do it. I can still show you. So let's just say that I have another client that's connected to a headphone box that happens to be connected to outputs 3 and 4 on my Mo2 M4. Again, I'm using my outputs 1 and 2 as my headphone out, maybe my own speaker output, but I'm going to have this headphone distribution box connected to outputs 3 and 4. What I could do is I could go up to the send here, the first send. It doesn't matter which one, just as long as you know what's up. I go to the send here, and I could just choose a new output. I could go to output 3 and 4. And what happens is that respective click, when I hit play, is now going to go to outputs 3 and 4 at the same time that it is going to the main outs 1 and 2. So I have a click track that's going to 2 separate outputs on my audio interface at the same time. And on top of that, I have complete control over the level of those respective signals going to those individual outputs, which is great. So it's going to be a little hard to see, because you can't see the faders like I can on my respective audio interface. But what if you can kind of conceptualize it for a moment, in this current state, here's how things are set, and here's how things would work. So this send, this is the send level, how much essentially volume is going to be sent to that output. It's set by default to 0 dB. We have a mute control, so we can mute that send quickly if we really want to for some reason. We also have a pre-fader control, which we'll come back to in a second. And then we have pan, which may be important to you, kind of like what this pan would do and what we kind of discussed before if you needed to pan that send on some pair of headphone sides or whatever it may be in your situation. I think you get the gist of it. Well, in this setup, if I were to hit play, again, it's going to send that click signal to output 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 simultaneously. And more importantly, if I control this fader down here, it controls the level that's being sent to output 1 and 2, output 1, 2, and 3 and 4 at the same time. So it's kind of a global control for all 4 of those outputs simultaneously, which can be really handy, especially if your client's like very, really chill and just like down with, keeping things simple in a way that maybe they just want to hear basically what you're hearing in terms of like the click level. That's fine. Maybe you've dialed in those settings perfectly and this just works for the both of you, right? But, there's some clients out there that may not want that. Maybe you want to hear the click a little bit louder than the client. Maybe client A is going to want to hear it louder than client B, right? Well, that's where this pre-fader button comes into play, but also the send level, right? If I hit the pre-fader button, what's going to happen is that when I hit play, basically we've now separated the volume levels of output 1 and 2 and output 3 and 4 in a way that this fader down here no longer controls both. This fader will only control whatever the output is set to at the bottom of the aux track, so in this case outputs 1 and 2 in my case, whereas the normal level signal that's of course set in our click settings is continually being sent out of output 3 and 4 and has not been attenuated. Right, so we've now divorced, for lack of a better term, output 1 and 2 or the output, the main output of this aux track from the send output, and subsequently now we can control that send output strictly from this little fader here, or this little control here, this volume send level control. So hopefully that makes sense. If I wanted to make this output 3 and 4 click track, in this case, this click level, extremely loud, I would just boost it, but it wouldn't get louder over here because it's totally different. It's a totally different level that we're using at this point compared to like what's going on the track. So then we have now independent control of those levels, which can be advantageous, right? Even more advantageous if that, if you have a multi-channel interface, and I'm just going to make something like, I'm going to imagine one of these buses is like another, output that I would have, theoretically have on my interface. But if we do something like this, we're sending the same click signal to not only the output of the aux track, but all of these sends. But with the pre-fader button engaged, then we have complete control over these respective mixes, these send mixes, specifically of the metronome, that is independent from this fader. So we basically have like 3 custom click mixes at this point, which can be great, right? So very advantageous there. I think it's a fantastic way of going about it. Now the last thing I want to show you, and this is more setting up like a headphone mix, and I'm going to quickly do it, but you may have a project that's kind of set up where it has some other aux tracks in here, which may be like specific mixes for, specific outputs on your audio interface. And I'm just going to call these like headphone 1 and 2. And this is, it's going to give us the same end result, to be honest. Let's make these like a different color. Oops. Anyways, this is going to give us the same, it's going to do the same thing at the end of the day for what it's worth. But it's important to know in the event your, maybe workflow looks like this. But if we were creating like, separate mixes, so we could have a little bit more control over those specific mixes. Maybe this is output 3, 4. Maybe this is assigned to like a bus. That's just kind of, feel free to, I'll say out 5, 6 or something like that. I'm just kind of like simulating something, so keep that in mind. Here we go. So, we have a, headphone amp connected to the 3, 4, another connected to 5, 6, and then we have like buses assigned to each, to make sure we can get some material in there. And again, feel free to skip this if you want to. Okay. So, we have our own like custom mix where we'd be sending some like other sends and material into these mixes and all that good stuff. What we could simply do at that point is just basically utilize the same thing, but instead of using the sends here on this kind of click track, and maybe I should rename this to make it more clear. 1 second here. Instead of using like direct outs, meaning like, previously we were using a physical output on these sends to send that click directly to that output. Maybe we're already doing that in our project with these, like this kind of workflow here. As you can see here, these mixes here are assigned to dedicated physical outputs, but they have bus assignments. So 47, 48. What we could do is simply go into the click track, and if we needed to send the click into these headphone mixes, that we've generated in Digital Performer, we could just assign the sends to those buses instead of the physical outputs or direct outputs. So 47 and then 48. Now this is going to be a loop. Let's see. Again, this is a kind of a quick example, but basically we'd be sending this click. Here we go. We'd be sending this click to once it's playing, whenever it would be being received. And you'll have to forgive me, my bus. I did this pretty quick and dirty, so like the bus assignments are all like jacked up, and they'll create a feedback loop as you saw. So keep that in mind. But anyways, if a click was playing on this track, it would be sent to these various buses, which would feed these tracks because their bus assignments are set to the same buses. So, and then we could utilize the pre-fader, post-fader, options that we saw before. And as a result, here, let me kind of move this over here so you can see what I'm talking about. As a result, then that would be, again, the same workflow, but just slightly a bit different depending on how you've built your Digital Performer project. Some folks will just send this click out to direct outs. That's fine. We went over that, and you know exactly what to do there. But in the event that you're creating a little bit more of an environment within Digital Performer that has a little bit more control over specific mixes before they go out to direct outputs that we're kind of using in this now example, this would be how you would do that. You would use buses to make that happen as opposed to direct outputs on the synths. So I digress there. Hopefully that wasn't like a tangent, but hopefully this makes sense. Anyways, so that's how you go about it. It's a really easy way of utilizing an aux to make this happen. We're going to talk about one more thing for what it's worth. We just set that back. But we're going to talk about one more thing that I think is going to be important here, but this kind of wraps up how you would utilize an aux track to gain more flexibility over level control, pan control of your click track, not only for yourself, but for other clients as well that might be connected up to your audio interface or your mixing setup, however that is, using sends, whether it be choosing direct outs or using buses given the state of your project that you've created in Digital Performer if you have like custom mixes in there already. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we end this video is going to be one last workflow, and this would be creating a click track in Digital Performer, similarly to what we've done with an aux track, but which would allow you to record the click and turn it into a physical soundbite if you need that for some reason. Maybe you want to send that to like a client in the event that they need that click track. Maybe you just want to have it as backup. Maybe you're trying to generate like a click noise so that somebody can take that file and put it into their Digital Performer project, and kind of like what we saw in preferences, choose that respective click as their own custom sound. So let's dive in and see how that would work. So I'm going to start over. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make an audio track. Now, it could be a mono track. It could be a stereo track. It's up to you. I'm going to do stereo just to keep things continuous, since we've been exclusively using stereo tracks for this video. If you recall, if we do go to our preferences here, our click preferences, we change the output name of this track, but the output is currently set to what we have called Alt 5 and 6. So I'm going to make sure that the input of my audio track is set to Alt 5 and 6. And this is kind of how you would generally set up a track to record something. So if you know how to do that, you might be very familiar with this process already. And let me just kind of move this to the side here so you can see what I'm doing. We record enable the track. We go to our sequence or tracks. It's kind of up to you. And then what I'm going to do, just to make things simple, is I'm going to enable the 2-bar. So actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to enable auto record here. I'm going to record it for just a little bit. I'm going to specify the auto record to start at measure 1 and end at measure 9. Metronome is on, so that should be able to patch through into this track. And then we are going to hit record. Okay. Cool. So it could have been soft hearing that in the video. I apologize if that was the case. It could be, based on our click settings that we have set up. But regardless, we created a click track. We recorded a click track. Now, I didn't really implement best practice. I probably should have called the track click so that, the soundbite would have been named click. I can rename the soundbite if I really need to. That's no problem. I could do that for the track as well. But we officially have a audio soundbite that has captured our click. And if we play that back, we're going to hear it. Which is great. So now that we can export that if we want. We can keep it in the project. We can use it as one of those audio clicks, as I kind of discussed before. But this kind of gives you the extra option to record that actual click signal if you want to. You may not need to, but it's an additional option should you want to do that. Anyway, maybe that was implied when we started to do busing and changing the audio output of our click track. But regardless, I think it's pretty handy to know. For example, maybe you're going to be sending it to a client, as I kind of mentioned before, who has Digital Performer that maybe does not have your click settings dialed in. You'd have an audio file that does that for you, right? So, yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward there. So let's wrap up the video here. This is, again, just to kind of recap, a couple of different ways that you can exploit the click or metronome system in Digital Performer. We've gone over the options that Digital Performer has within its own preferences that allow you to really control the type of click that you want to use, whether it be audio, MIDI, or visual punches for the film scoring folks out there. There's a lot of flexibility on how you can control what that click sounds like, the level it is, where it's going to go to, and of course implementing workflows like using an Aux track or even an audio track. There's a lot of exploitation that you can use on those types of tracks that would allow you to control the levels of those or quickly control the levels of that respective click signal, its pan position, if it's muted or not, and of course using sends to our advantage, utilizing kind of a workflow that might benefit you in the event that you're using multiple outputs in your audio interface to send a click signal to multiple clients. So, yeah, hopefully this video finds you well today. If you like the content in this video, feel free to like and of course subscribe. If you have any comments that you have questions about, feel free to comment below. And of course, if you have any additional content you would like to see, just comment below. Ask. I'm happy to make that, jot it down, and create a video for it in the near future. So until then, see you next time. Bye for now.